Buona tarda, buenas tardes, good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth I am at La Caixa Foundation and the Club of Rome, in which we intend to draw light on the challenges laying ahead in the implementation of the UN 2030 agenda in the Mediterranean region. In fact, a very timely debate this week as the UN General Assembly is convening in New York. During this first year of cooperation between IMET, La Caixa Foundation, and the Club of Rome, we are concentrating on the fight against climate change in the Mediterranean region, which unfortunately has emerged as a global hotspot. That means a vast territory that without concerted action will be heavily affected and impacted by climate change in the near future, as the reports from the IPCC and the MEDEC are pointing out. We want to bring the voice of leaders and experts closer to civil society and citizenship, because as we have heard so many times before, we have been called to act, not only those that act as governmental leaders, but also citizenship at large. Today's session is entitled The Road to a More Sustainable and Climate Resilient Mediterranean, and we are delighted and honored to introduce as guest speaker Hakima El Haite. Hakima, above all, is a leader who inspires. Nowadays, we are lacking leaders who inspire worldwide, and she does inspire. In 2015, during the COP21, I could see her in action with my own eyes in Le Bourget as vice president of the COP21 when she was Minister of the Environment of Morocco. I saw vision, I saw courage, and I also saw intelligence. You know how difficult it is to steer these multilateral negotiations. 1 year later, during the COP22 in Marrakech, she was appointed as a special envoy and UN high-level champion of the COP22. Let us not forget that Morocco is the only Southern Mediterranean country that has hosted twice the international climate conferences. I always give as a very positive example Morocco, which among all the Arab Southern Mediterranean countries, it has emerged as a leading case in transitioning to a green economy capable of opening new opportunities for wealth creation and sustainable jobs. As I could recently publish in a paper devoted to green growth in the Arab Mediterranean countries, Morocco has well understood that environmental constraints such as land degradation, strong energy dependence, water stress, and vulnerability to climate change, coupled with limitations of economic growth and public policies to steer up job creation, require a shift in the economic model as to embrace a greener and more inclusive paradigm. This country, Morocco, has adopted a number of legislative and regulatory reforms, such as the National Charter for Environment and Sustainable Development, a law on the environment and sustainable development, and a national strategy on sustainable development, which can serve as an example to other countries in the region. But today, ladies and gentlemen, we want to speak about the whole Mediterranean region and how we can better position our region ahead of the COP26 in Glasgow, which will be held in a few weeks from now. Hakima va intervenir en français. Nous sommes vraiment ravis de t'accueillir parmi nous.
Now I'll speak in French. We're so happy to welcome you, and I give you the floor. Thank you, dear Roger. To me, it's such an honor to be your guest, and I'd like to thank the La Fundación La Caixa and the European Institute for the Mediterranean and the Club of Rome. And I'd like to congratulate you for the initiative of Media 2030, because indeed we need to have a dialogue in order to unite our intelligences and to build bridges between the north and the south of the Mediterranean. And in fact, we should keep on attracting, as we have done throughout our history, regardless of the country in the Mediterranean. we are all marked by our Mediterranean nature. We have to keep on struggling for the Mediterranean. And I'd like to thank you for the introduction words about my country, Morocco. It is true that Morocco is a leader in terms of strategies and environmental policies, sustainable environmental policies, not only because of the strategies, but also because of the implementation of such strategies. And I'm very proud of having been able to of bringing the national strategy for sustainable development in Morocco and to having made adopted the law about sustainable development in Morocco. So yes, indeed, I am particularly proud that my country has done all of this in terms of sustainability and in terms of the production and the fight against climate change. To coming back to the Mediterranean is a rich territory that has fascinated everybody on the north and the south. We have different civilizations on both sides of the Mediterranean. Cultures and civilizations have developed and have given to the world, have given birth to the world as we know it today. It is a rather Mediterranean that our values, the values of democracy and freedom were born, that we defend, and that where human beings have invented agriculture, the Neolithical revolution over which we found, over which the development of our human societies have developed. Today, the Mediterranean is one of the regions most populated and developed in the world, and it is also a region with a lot of strengths, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. The inequalities between the north and the south cross in terms of income per inhabitant, 3 to 5 times above, higher in the north, and the poverty and instability actually jeopardize the countries in the south, and they feed a migration flow that go beyond the capacities of northern countries. After the crisis in Syria that has generated so many million migrants, and it is lived as a tragedy in Europe. But let's all remember that migration due to climate change would be of 250 million people by 2050. And we're not doing anything about that today. So migration flows will only increase if we do not actually face the challenges posed by climate change. There are about 500 million people living around the Mediterranean, and they influence the ecological balances in the region. Every day, we lose habitat, we destroy forest land, we degrade the, our rivers, we exploit the marine life, and we contaminate, we pollute our seas, and many endemic species in the Mediterranean disappear. Every year, more than 220 million holidaymakers come to our coastlines, and this figure should actually attain 630 million by 2025, and it stimulates the construction of new infrastructures for mass tourism around the Mediterranean. 25% of the world sea traffic goes through the Mediterranean, and the Pelago Sanctuary suffers especially of this intense circulation, specifically where the risks of collisions with whales are quite significant. Coastline tourism, marine tourism, the increase of the maritime traffic, the exploitation of offshore hydrocarbons, aquaculture, the development of wind farms offshore. The Mediterranean is currently facing a development without precedent in the sea economy. And yet, the Mediterranean is one of the regions that's least protected in the world, whereas its natural resources are quite limited. The Mediterranean has been identified by the GIEC as one of the hot spots that's being threatened by climate change. It's a region that's particularly vulnerable to climate change. The increase in the world's temperature, and above all, acidification are particularly serious in southern countries. And the Mashrek, well, the populations will be faced with current droughts and food insecurity due to the erosion and the degradation of the soil, and natural catastrophes that will become increasingly frequent. But the south is affected more intensely than the north, and the north is not is it will also be affected. But if the south is more affected than the south, the north is not out of these risks. During the summer 2021, Algeria, Turkey, Italy, Greece, and even Spain have had terrible fires that has implied the death of quite a few dozen people and the evacuation of thousands of other people and the massive destruction of local ecosystems. The cause is the climate problem, the climate change, the exploitation of natural resources, and an excess urbanization. These 400 million people who are threatened by climate change in the coastline regions, there are 150 million people, and in the hydrological zones, they have 250 million people. In other words, we are facing a situation in which we only have one single choice. We only have a single choice: to adapt and to innovate in order to fight against climate change. Normally, we listen to during the COP21 that the, the, the less will be the best. Today, we need to adapt, and we need also mitigation. We need to adapt and mitigate. The time to wait, see and wait has stopped. It's not only southern countries who are affected by climate change. And I said so during the COP21. Yes, climate change is a reality, I said, a reality that will cause millions and millions to move. People talk about 700 million people who will be under a food crisis, 600 million people who did not have enough to eat. In the meantime, climate change has become a reality that Africans live on a daily basis. But today it's the struggle not only of southern countries, it's also the struggle of the north, because nowadays climate change is a reality and it affects both northern countries and southern countries. And we have seen the catastrophes, the floods, and the fires that have decimated woodlands throughout Europe this summer. So the only choice we have is to be united, to show solidarity, and to build up a northern-southern solidarity bridge so that this struggle is embraced by the largest number of citizens possible. Because it's not only about countries or nations or states, it's the struggle that we should all embrace. Every citizen should embrace it. So to adapt or mitigate, that needs to be done. We need adaptation policies. And as you know, we will get many co-benefits in terms of mitigation in the field of food or in the field of energy, when we talk about renewables, in the construction of resilient buildings. All of these adaptation practices can bring forth benefits in terms of mitigation, and therefore we have a single choice, i.e. to start adapting as of now and to start and mitigate as of now, taking into account, bearing in mind the amount of climate degradation we have. To be resilient, the northern shore of the Mediterranean issues 90% of the emissions. We are not confronting each other anymore. Ever the Paris Agreement, we all cooperate. We should should all make contributions to mitigate the effects of climate change. Notwithstanding that, there is a reality. And the fact is that the North is actually responsible for 90% of the emissions. And it should keep on being interested in what happens in the South because the climate doesn't know about borderlines or about boundaries. Any action in Spain could affect the South, and any action carried out in Spain to struggle against climate change or in Italy, it can have a positive impact on the other African countries. The situation is not limited to the southern shore of the Mediterranean. As you know, we are facing other realities. We have other priorities. We are facing problems of instability, of course. And we all know that the priorities may not be the same, and yet we should not forget the southern shore because it is only together that we'll be able to overcome this gigantic challenge and all of the consequences related to climate change, i.e., food insecurity, which generates migration flows and instability, both in Africa, both in the north and in the south of the Mediterranean. Thus, an active collaboration between the different Mediterranean countries is absolutely necessary, and it's unavoidable to co-construct cross-sectional solutions. And we've generated good practices. You have mentioned them. Morocco has generated some very good practices, and I have to say that the examples are applicable to other countries, and they can be found in other countries. They are not only scaled up by my country, Morocco, but innovations and good practices for adaptation do exist in other African countries as well. And Europe should recognize these good practices to find common solutions. Europe and Northern Shore Mediterranean countries play a crucial role in diplomacy and negotiations, climate negotiations. You have talked about leadership. We do need leadership because without that leadership, we will not be able to make any headway in the climate agenda. Without this leadership, we will not be able to have the capacity and the strength to design these public policies which will open the road, open the way for humanity towards carbon neutrality by 2050, either through member countries, the European Union member states, just to mention France, Italy, and Spain, which are leader countries, or through the European Union itself. In other words, Europe should play a crucial leadership role within the negotiations in order to influence and actually push forward the negotiations so that the Paris Agreement is implemented and that this global transformation becomes a reality, a daily reality in the different countries. Let's remember that COP26 carried out at the specific time of our common history. Never ever in the past, human beings from the whole world had faced the same crisis at the same time and with the same economic, social, and health consequences. Today, this is happening at a time in which country priorities are not the same. You know that the other tragedies, our recent tragedies, have shown this. Unfortunately, it's very tragic, but unfortunately for us, because the priorities of many countries nowadays is not to struggle against climate change, but rather to fight against the consequences of the health crisis, i.e., to save lives, i.e., to rebound the economy. And these priorities could actually make the Paris Agreement agenda and the Paris Agreement implementation as a secondary priority compared to the current priorities. The mistake we should not make, because COVID should be taken as an opportunity in order to relaunch the economy. And this will take us towards a carbon-free trajectory, and it will allow us to build better, greener, and more sustainably. Europe talks about the New Deal, the New Green Deal. And I believe that Europe has also got a responsibility to make a dimension, a cooperation towards southern countries to be a central policy of that Green Deal. There is no northern shore country, no northern country that can act on its own. No country in the world can struggle against climate change on its own. We need to have a vision, a holistic vision, a global, fully integrated vision, especially for the Mediterranean. We need a Mediterranean vision. We need a Mediterranean strategy. I'm not saying that nothing has been done. There are many, many initiative actions that have been undertaken. There are strategies that have been launched. There are institutions that are working very proactively in this field. And you are a case in fact. I mean, by inviting us, you are all very active, and many other institutions are very active for the Mediterranean to be ready to struggle against climate change and to implement the Paris Agreement and to launch this new civilization, which is a carbon-free civilization. Unfortunately, what we are observing nowadays is not very, very brilliant, and it doesn't encourage us. We are facing a crisis that is unprecedented, this world pandemic. But the pandemic has not slowed down climate change. We need, at the European Union, which has the know-how, which has the technology, which has a financial muscle and the technical capacities, the EU has the obligation to actually play the role of a leader, not only over southern shore Mediterranean countries, but also over the whole Mediterranean community within the United Nations in terms of the climate negotiation. So the international community, the EU, the different member states of the EU, and the northern shore Mediterranean countries have an enormous responsibility with regards to COP26, because during the COP26 meeting, they will have to show their political will in order to combat climate change. And this political will needs to reinforce their ambition. And nowadays, those present, I mean, this year, if things continue the way they're going, we will increase our temperature by 3 degrees, which will be a catastrophe for the whole world. And if we continue as we're doing nowadays, acting as business as usual, our temperatures will keep on increasing and they will imply worse floods, worse fires, and worse extreme climate conditions and the destruction of biodiversity in the planet. In other words, we are taking the world towards worse extreme poverty and the loss of food security. So nowadays, we only have a single choice: to coordinate, to be coordinated, and to show our solidarity, our mutual solidarity. We can only work with each other, hand in hand, European leaders with southern leaders. The northern approach, the southern approach, we need that leadership in order to actually expand our ambitions with regards to the struggle against climate change. And we also know that northern shore Mediterranean countries should take action if we truly want to go towards a green transition. What can they do, you will ask me, in order to accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement, as I've said, first of all, to increase our ambitions? Secondly, we need that these countries promote the respect for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement had defined promises for 2020. Well, these promises have not been fully respected, and northern countries should make their voices be heard. and respected. The fact that we have postponed our commitments, the $100 billion that had been actually promised has not been a good action. They should have been implemented immediately to help the most vulnerable countries, not only to face the health crisis, but also to adapt to climate change. So we need that northern countries exert some lobbying pressures. They should lobby so that the Paris Agreement be respected and implemented. And the second point is the carbon price. In Glasgow, we will negotiate Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And the price of carbon, we need to define the carbon mechanism. I believe that this mechanism will be transformational because through this mechanism, we will be able to set up funds that could promote innovation, funds that could promote global transformation, funds that could allow us to reduce the financial gap that exists in terms of adaptation measures. In other words, to place a price on carbon during COP26 is crucial, or at least we need to define the mechanism so that we can actually give it a price. Because maybe we will have corridors of prices depending on the countries and the problems. And thus, the goal is to define a mechanism to give carbon a price. In order to continue, I believe that each one of us has a responsibility. I do not believe that northern countries are less important in terms of the responsibility they face, because I believe that northern countries represent a reservoir of opportunity, not only. Sorry, I'm saying northern countries, but I mean southern countries. Southern countries have an enormous responsibility in terms of COP26 and the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Southern countries represent that reservoir, a reservoir of sunshine, a reservoir of natural resources, that reservoir of project. Because if the infrastructures that exist in the north, if the constructions that exist in the north, if the technology that exists in the north is very hard to fully change in order to abide by the agreements of Paris, well, we in the South, we have a golden opportunity to build in a carbon-free way. But for that, we need this international cooperation. We need this international political will. And our governments could do so much by just sending a clear signal, a clear and credible and feasible signal, by transforming the public policies, by transforming their economy from the current economy to the green economy, from the current situation to the green situation. And this is crucial because this message will actually promote some private sector dynamic. It will give actually confidence to the private sector. It will give confidence to the banks for them to change the regulation systems, and it will promote some dynamics that will place us all on the right road for a green economy. So we will be in COP26 with great hope. Hope that all governments will be courageous enough to carry out these public policies in their countries, to actually do so in the Mediterranean, to unite all of our messages, to truly go towards action, to implement action, to start acting. So what can Mediterranean countries do? Well, governments should be engaged, and they should engage and start implementing consistent policies, not only in terms of carbon and fuels. Today, we can't afford talking or calling for a green transition while still producing fossil fuels. We cannot afford being the leaders and the country that gives lessons whilst you still invest in old technologies, all polluting technologies. So we need coordination in terms of international policy and politics, and we need leadership more than ever now. We need that the Convention of Human Rights should include the environmental rights as well, and that's why that at the International Liberal have created the first committee based on climate justice that is narrowly working with political parties, with the European liberals, in order to integrate the notion of environmental right in the Human Rights Convention of the United Nations. I believe that it is only together, so civil society, business, public authorities, banks, and governments, only together we can combat the terrible effects of climate change and overcome the gigantic challenges posed by climate change. And the EU should have a common vision. We should have a common vision, and we should have a common leadership that will bring its voice into the United Nations and during the COP26 meeting. To end, I'd like to say how the concept of absolute dematching was unimaginable throughout the history of humanity. Never, as human beings, we had been asked to carry out such an effort. Never, ever before, we had been required to change everything. Because what is the Paris Agreement all about? The point is to change the way we produce, to change the way we consume, to change our daily practices, to change our consumer choices. And therefore, the point is to change our culture and our civilization and to go towards this carbon-free civilization. We had never ever been required as human beings to carry out this effort. But nowadays, it's crucial. It's a life or death situation to save the life of millions of people. Many million people are confronted to death due to our consumption choices, our production choices. Nowadays, we need that leadership more than ever. The world, the most vulnerable people is waiting for us. We're waiting for the leadership from the north, and we need that badly. We need that not only from the government, but we also need civil society. We need NGOs, non-state actors. And I'd like to thank all of the non-governmental actors and non-state actors who are so proactive nowadays and who keep on promoting the discussion and who are promoting these dynamics to create these dynamics, because it's not just a governmental agenda, the climate. It is a development agenda. The climate is a security agenda. And when I talk about security, I'm thinking about all of the African people who live and who have no access to electricity. 600 million Africans. I'm actually talking about 1 billion people who have no access to electricity. And we cannot expect to struggle against terror or against obscurantism in the dark. So when we talk about climate, we also talk about security. It is a peace agenda for the world. Migration,
dérangement des écosystèmes aujourd'hui
is a result of the collapse of natural systems in the world nowadays, which is creating new illnesses.
le climat.
The pandemic that started in March 2020 is a result of climate change. Which scientists, nobody can deny that COVID-19 is not the result of climate change and the climate crisis. We need to negotiate with nature. I mean, we can't negotiate with nature. You cannot negotiate with nature. You may negotiate at the United Nations, but we need to respect our planet Earth if we want planet Earth to respect us and if we want to keep our life. Because the planet will exist whether we are here or not. So nowadays, it is a citizens' agenda what we're facing. And I'd like to thank all of the young people who have actually made their voices heard out in the street. The new generation, a generation that will need to face the consequences of our political choices and our political action nowadays. So I'd like to thank them for their voice, for their struggle, because one of the most important superpowers in the world has come back to the negotiating table, the USA. I'm hopeful because the USA is back under the leadership of President Joe Biden. And I hope that EU will push the ambition forward so that the EU is not just beautiful speeches, empty words at the headquarters of the United Nations. We have to act in reality so that people do not suffer anymore due to climate change. I have the hope that China will counterbalance the effect of these fossil fuel producing countries. And tomorrow, China will also cooperate with the European Union and the United States in order to defend the interests of the most vulnerable countries. Yes, I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that we will be able to change with COP26. We had said that COP21 had been the constitutional COP. We adopted the Paris Agreement. We saw that COP22 was the agreement. With COP22, we created the Marrakesh partnership, but not enough action has happened. So I'm asking everybody to act and to act now. Thank you.
Hakima, for such a very inspiring and comprehensive at the same time speech. I think you were extremely pragmatic, but at the same time you were also very ambitious, and you put passion in the words you said today. In fact, that was the Hakim I remember from Le Bourget when we met at the COP21 in Paris, which was a very lengthy and difficult process of negotiations. Before we move into the questions, I would like to summarize with 2 or 3 ideas what you just said, because I was taking lots of notes. First of all, I think you described the situation, especially the situation of inequality, from many points of view, not only income inequality that exists between the north and the south of the Mediterranean, and how climate change is an accelerator of, for instance, of migration, of water scarcity, of problems in food production, of land degradation, and so on and so forth. And many of these phenomena, some of them are economic, some others are social, some others have to do with the development of the land, have to do with the environment, have a special impact in the Mediterranean region. So basically, what you try to emphasize is that there are 2 types of actions that we have been undertaking: mitigation and adaptation. And I think at the end of your message, what you said is we were trying to concentrate on the actions of mitigation rather than adaptation, because we thought that mitigation were less costly actions. But when we see the reality today, we might be too late to basically go for mitigation. And we therefore need to push for mitigation, but also adaptation. And while pushing for adaptation, we will also push for mitigation. Well, of course, you were making a pledge to to intervene in the debate of in the fight against climate change. That keeping the status quo is by no means an answer, because of course in the Mediterranean, if we keep the status quo or the status quo scenario in the Mediterranean means an important raise of temperature, which will be above the average raising temperature worldwide, and therefore the effect will be more severe. So you basically propose solutions in 5 areas. Raise our ambitions high for the COP26. This is very important. Second of all, comply with the Paris Agreements. I mean, it is already 6 years since the Paris Agreements were signed. In the meantime, the US actually withdrew from the Paris Agreements. Now they are back. I mean, perhaps you could actually comment on what you think that the role of the US will be now that they are back into the Paris Agreement. But again, one of the important commitments, which was the leverage of 100 billion euros annually from the private sector, this has been stalled due to the COVID-19. So basically, you are saying, well, we need to go back to the initial commitments. Also, in terms of ETS carbon price, fixing ETS carbon price, in terms of technology transfer, and of course, very important, in our region, scrap subsidies to gray energy infrastructure, because this is terrible. Both, I mean, not only in the south, but also in the north, with certain investments related to, I don't know, to natural gas infrastructure that public banks are still supporting and governments are still supporting. And myself, I'm a defender of the natural gas energy, but I have to say that I fully agree that this kind of investments should be scrapped. So finally, you said, well, we need to act Mediterranean people. We need to act with a common voice, and at least this is what we will propose, and we are very happy and glad that we share the same views. I have a few questions for you, and we cannot speak any longer because we want to hear your answers and your responses. Ahmed is asking, are you optimistic regarding a positive outcome of the COP26 that meets the challenge and that meets the challenges that you actually were pointing out?
I think I did already answers to this question. I said by essence, I'm optimistic, you know. Indeed, COP26 is happening in a very special time of our history with the pandemic. The diplomacy is very difficult. The movements are very difficult. You are wondering if you can travel or not. The impact, the economic impact and social impact of the pandemic is very challenging, you know, and it's very difficult for me to tell you if leaders around the world will put climate on the top list of their priorities. But I'm hopeful because United States is coming back, EU is pushing, China is now pushing too, and review its commitment and increase its ambitions. Yeah, but this COP26 is not an easy one, and I hope that nations will agree to integrate the fight against climate change and the road to carbon neutrality within the recovery plan and within their the relaunch of the world economy. Difficult to say, to confirm, but I'm optimistic.
It's always good to remain optimistic.
Yeah.
Donc, nous avons une autre question de Baya de Tunisie.
We have another question from Maya in Tunisia. He asks, what are the commitments of the parties that have won the Moroccan elections in the field of climate change. Has that issue been approached during the election campaign? Was that discussed during the elections campaign?
He's talking about the parties in Morocco?
Exactement.
During our elections in Morocco?
Oui, quel est les engagements des partis
Yes. What are the commitments of the political parties that won the elections with regards to climate change? Has there been a discussion, a debate, etc.? Right. Allow me to say how we are structured in Morocco. We have already implemented a basis, which is the will of our country's citizens. We have as a basis the Constitution. In our Constitution, back in 2011, we have the right to a healthy natural environment. And that's crucial because it is the pillar over which we have struggled to build up our vision of a sustainable development. And it's based on this constitutional platform that Hassan, our beloved king, he had asked to have every chapter of development, of sustainable development, which has been translated into a framework law for sustainable development. And it has turned climate and the law about climate and the protection of the natural environment as a basis. And that has regulated and legislated about the relationship between the Moroccan entrepreneur and nature, between Moroccan policies and nature. So these laws do exist. And I had the privilege to present it in the parliament. And that has stemmed from a constitutional reference. And it is a point of reference, a constitutional point of reference, because it was the King of Morocco who asked for this. And all of the political parties have to be well aligned, the programs have to be well aligned to respect the law. I'm not going to say that I've read in detail all of the programs of all of the political parties during their election campaign, but all Moroccan political parties have to abide by the law, and they therefore have to have the natural environment and the protection of the natural environment and the struggle against climate change as a crucial pillar of their program. So yes, I say that absolutely yes. The political party that has won the elections, and I know their program, they have respected and they have integrated fully climate in their policies and in their programs.
I'm not hearing you.
I can't.
D'accord. So we have another question, this one from Emmanuel from France, which says, what are the needs in terms of financial assistance for Southern Mediterranean countries, and how can they benefit from the EU Green Deal and that you mentioned during your intervention, and the new EU agenda for the Mediterranean that the Commission launched, released last February?
You know, he's asking for the capacity building assistance. Yes.
Yeah, how can they benefit?
Yeah, so let me tell you that there are many funds which are dedicated to capacity building for the south, the south of the Mediterranean region or Africa. Many funds and many projects. The issue with such kind of funds is that there are multiple actors. Many actors are intervening in this framework. Many funds. The problem is that we don't have an integrated approach. From the north to the south, which is built together with the south, to build capacities. There are many initiatives. I remember that when I was writing the yearbook of 2016, the first yearbook within the UNFCCC, I remember the huge amount of initiatives. What we need to focus and to integrate all the initiative and to have a framework within which we can act in each country, etc. And the question here, when we are speaking about capacity building, is not money. The question is how to choose the right initiative together with the country which is in need, and how to build the right capacities within the sector which is the most vulnerable.
Excellent, thank you. And the last question, because we want to finish on time. I think our followers will thank us for that, even though, as you can see, we could continue for hours and hours discussing with Hakima, because it's a subject that she knows perfectly well, and that she's been in various positions throughout her professional career. Now that you were saying, well, there are several initiatives in the Mediterranean trying to work in the direction that you were actually describing, from north to south, more recently from south to south as well. But what is, in your view, what is the role that the Union for the Mediterranean should play? Because you mentioned the UFM in your speech. You also said that that when you had been minister, you worked a lot with the UFM. You probably held and took part in one of their ministerial meetings of environment. I think that it's either end of this year or beginning of next year that they are going to hold a ministerial meeting of environment. So what is the role that the UFM could actually play to foster this climate diplomacy at the regional level and connect it with the global level?
I think that it could play a major role. I told you that we need leadership, and I told you that we need international framework, and we need a framework. We need a vision for the Mediterranean. We need a strategy for the Mediterranean, and we need a roadmap for the Mediterranean. And this institution can play a major role, not only to unify the position of the Mediterranean countries, but also to boost and to impulse dynamic within the EU and within the UNFCCC during the negotiation. I know that it's already holding many expertise, has many reports, and implementing many initiatives, etc. But we really need an integrated vision, which is declined into a long-term strategy with roadmaps and with a review of the NDCs of each country within the region. So we need this framework, and it's kind of l'Union pour la Méditerranée can play a major role in implementing this strategy and in boosting the international community to go toward the carbon neutrality trajectory. It also might be the coordinator of all the funds, because the problem today, and it was what I was saying, funds are there, but you have to go to look for them, you have to know where they are, and you have to have the capacity to apply for them. And for that, there is another role to play, because here we need the expertise. The expertise to support the countries in the south of the Mediterranean tour to go to apply for those funds, etc. So I will say that it has a strategic role, a diplomatic role first, which is to be loud and to lobby for the Mediterranean, the countries of the Mediterranean. It has a strategic role, which is to lay out this framework and this strategy and to set this vision for the region. It has an operational role because it has to implement together with each country to give the capacity building and to capacitate the countries to implement their roadmap, to build their INDCs, their national plan of adaptation, etc., etc. And it has this coordinator role, which is to coordinate and to give the information to parties, to look for finance, so yes, its role, its measure, and it should be more loud and should have more ambassadors. Because we need to hear voices, and unfortunately we don't hear voices. We don't know famous faces of fight against climate change in this entity, and we should know people. We should listen to them. They should be louder and more vocal.
Thank you, Hakima. We've got two late questions, maybe too many now, but there is one part of the, I mean, you can actually read it in the questions box. It is a very long, it's a comment plus a question. Unfortunately, we cannot give the floor to people who are following us, so they only have the possibility to write questions. But I think I will take that final part because I think it is interesting. It says, malgré les efforts importants de votre propre...
In spite of the significant efforts of your own country, Morocco, and the significant efforts of other Mediterranean countries, if we had to be critical with regards to this region, what would you criticize them for?
Well, we know that there are countries like Morocco in the southern Med that are doing efforts in that direction. Other countries too. I know Egypt, Jordan, for instance. If you had to be, despite all of that, which is extremely positive, if you had to be critical towards the region, what would you say?
Oh, une question bien difficile.
My goodness, what a difficult question. Because to that, I would answer that I would be very critical with regards to social inequalities and the way we distribute wealth in our countries in general. That's what I say. Social inequalities and the lack of opportunities, access to education, access to the digital world, access to health. I'm speaking in general in terms of southern countries, which is the terrible plague of the southern Mediterranean region. And I'm not referring only to Morocco, I'm also referring to other countries in our region where we have a lot of instability, a lot of demonstrations carried out by young people who are asking for the right to a dignified life and to having opportunities. But I relate to all of this to inequalities. And I would say that climate change is exacerbating these inequalities. And at least we should raise that limitation, which is independent from the development of southern countries. Countries in the south have not been the root cause of the conditions that have generated this climate change. We have our own problems. We already have enough problems to solve this. So if we only had to talk about climate change, it would not be fair. So the struggle against inequality is a priority if we want to actually prosper in our Mediterranean region.
And with these final words, we will conclude, not without thanking you. We know that you have a very pressing schedule agenda back in Morocco. We are so sorry you could not join us in Barcelona. We will certainly next year, once the situation has gone back to normalcy, if we can, we will invite you to come to Barcelona, to the premises of La Caixa Foundation in Palau to discuss on this issue and other issues. But in the meantime, we would like to thank you. And I will only make one plea to you. Please never lose your passion in your discourse, because your passion is actually we are joining you by this passion. We miss so much passion in the faces and in the discourses of our leaders, and we are thankful, very thankful to you for this passion that you have given to us, even if it was for a short time, for 1 hour today. But thank you so much. And thank you also to all the people who join us, both in Zoom and especially in the web stream in YouTube.
Merci à vous, Roger, et merci à l'assistance, merci aux interprètes.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, all attendants. Thank you, interpreters.
On the websites of the La Caixa Foundation and IMET, and we will meet again next month with the Secretary General of MedCites. MedCites is the network, the Mediterranean network of cities. We have Moroccan cities, but we also have Spanish cities, Italian cities, and up to Lebanon and even Jordan. So please stay tuned on the websites of La Caixa Foundation and IMET, and we will meet again. Thank you so much.
Merci à vous, au revoir. Au plaisir de vous rencontrer une autre fois. Au revoir.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. It has been such an honor and such a pleasure. Thank you, and see you next time.